Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of Genre Blender, the podcast that celebrates all things storytelling. I am Kris.
And I'm Ryan, and today's topic is adaptations and crossovers in books, film, TV, games, and the wildcard pick, which I don't think I added, by the way. I'm pretty sure this was you. I hope
I
it was
definitely
you.
added this one.
Okay, good. Stage productions. Cool.
You know
Because
what? A
I
form
do
of
not
media
recall.
that is currently getting movie adaptations of things that have been on Broadway in particular have come to the screen. So I thought it was interesting as a concept to put that one in here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting time. I feel like there's a lot of these now. Like we've just got
Oh,
so many,
absolutely.
and that's great. But yeah, so first, little bit of follow up and some announcements as well before we kick into things. The first one is just a little bit of follow up from the last episode where we had a little bit of a some particular opinions were shared. Let's put it that way.
We've got a first comment, though, a first question. Amazing.
Indeed. So this was from Kim on I guess we calling it Book Talk, I guess, right, on TikTok, asking which fantasy book from recent years do you think will be a classic in years to come? And they said it's not a dig. They're honestly curious.
It's you know what? It's I saw the question about a week ago, and I saw Ryan put it in the notes that we were going to talk about it in this episode. And I've honestly been racking my brain to think of, if we
Yeah.
think of the definition of classics and doing something new or introducing a concept, like what fantasy book have I read in recent years that may be a classic in 50 years' time? And the only one I really came up with was an indie self-pub book that I read, I think it was last year. And this is a philosophical sort of magical realism called The Way of Unity by Sarah K. Bolstrop. And the reason that I've sort of picked this one is that it's an in-depth look at, I guess, religion, which has been talked about before in classics, but we start off with this character who very much thinks, well, throughout the whole book, they think they're on the right side of religion, but it's the first time I've really seen it where that is quite innocent, and then that gets turned on its head and sort of gets vilified, and it's the same character experiencing that on both sides throughout the entirety of the book. And I thought it was such an interesting concept that we, I guess, sometimes think in our heads where we hang out with people who are maybe religious or follow different ideations than ourselves. But the first time I've seen them go, I'm on the right side of this, and go, I'm on the wrong side of this, but I believe in it, so I'm going to do it anyway. And it really exploring that sort of thematic. And I thought it was just really interesting. And that's probably the only one I can think of that I can think maybe, 50 to 100 years' time, that may be a classic, is that idea.
Wow. Do you think I would like this book?
I
I'm
actually
actually curious
do
now.
because it's very low fantasy.
Hmm.
There's not a whole lot of magic in it. It's very philosophical, very thematic, and looking at that theme, which is probably the only fantasy I'd recommend to you to go ahead and pick up. But yeah, I think I'm happy to lend it to you on our next
Yeah, cool.
venture. But did
Sounds
you think
good.
of one for sci-fi as well?
Sort of. I didn't really ponder over this too much, but I was just thinking, because the one that comes to mind for me is always like the Expanse books, but they're not. They would never be like classics. I don't think they're too adventurous. They're too just like whimsy. Not. I mean, they do go into deep philosophical stuff as well, but they're a little bit more just for funsies. But the one that comes to mind for me is the Three Body Problem,
Yeah,
by I can't pronounce his name.
Cixin Cixin Liu.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. I think, I mean, it's getting it's in its heyday right now because of the TV show, and we'll talk about this. Hey, but
That's what it's all
I
about.
yes, exactly, fits right on theme. Yeah, I think that one would be considered a classic in years to come. It's good that it's translated fiction as well, which is always fantastic to have more of those as considered classics. But yeah, it's kind of similar thing where it kind of got into the philosophical, but also it's hard sci-fi as well, So it kind of yeah, it ticks a lot of boxes, and I think it's really thoughtful science fiction, and I love that about it. So I've still got the other two to read, but I will be reading those ones.
Was gonna say, I'm waiting for your little book buying crawl to see if you pick up the same book, the same edition that I did of the Three Body
So
Problem.
I saw your edition and I went, "Ooh, that's very nice." But there is a FlexiBound edition that I've had my eye on for a while,
Right.
and I'll probably end up picking that one up. So I'll see if it's in the store when I go on my little
I'm
adventure.
sure we'll talk about the special editions and are they worth it. And I think it's one
I'm
of our
sure.
episodes that
I think it is.
we'll get into.
Yeah.
But thank you, Kim, for that question. And if anybody else wants to ask questions while we're doing these, if you have things that you want to know about or episodes that you want us to make, go ahead and comment on any of the social medias, and we'll follow up on the next episode. Which brings us to some announcements. Ryan, if you want to take
Yeah,
away
a
the
couple of
new
them.
stuff.
Easy. So yeah, so I've been a little bit busy behind the scenes getting some stuff set up for the podcast. So we've actually launched a Patreon. And for now, there is solely just a free tier, so that's all there is. But we wanted a place where we could hold our book discussions when we start talking about Jeff Vandermeer's Southern Reach trilogy, quadrolid, whatever, 4 books now,
Quadruplets, I don't know. Whatever it's called.
whatever it is. So yeah, we wanted a place where we can have that discussion and sort of chat with people in the community as well about it. So if you want to jump in and talk about it, it's kind of spoilery chat. That's where that's going to go. So at the moment, there's the actual episodes. I've posted them in there. So you can actually get those and watch them in there as well with all the show notes and everything. And then there'll be extra stuff and our book chat as well. So we'll probably end up doing some behind the scenes stuff and whatever else we can think of, post stuff early, for members and that kind of thing. But yeah, if you're interested in that, feel free to join up. We're just Genre Blender on Patreon, so you can search for it. And we'll have all the links in the show notes as well. So that's the first announcement. And then the second one is I just put a little website together for us as well. So if you're wanting to go to any of the links for finding where the podcast is at, going to the actual podcast links, the YouTube channel, and our Instagram and TikTok for our clips and social media stuff, it's at genreblenderpodcast.com and everything is there. So that's kind of an easy way to just share all the stuff because social media is hard.
Ryan's definitely the brains behind all social media. I just turn up and talk. I'm waiting for the day where they go, here, this is now for you to do.
Here's your job.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah, exciting announcements, everything down below. Let's jump into what we've been reading, playing, watching.
Yeah. So I'll go first because I kind of know one of yours at least. But so I finished Annihilation. Haven't finished Authority yet. I've got like 100 pages, 90 pages to go. I was hoping to get it done by today, but that's okay. We've got the chat next episode. But I haven't been reading much else just because I've been super busy at work and with other projects. So my reading hasn't been the best reading month for me, but that's okay. That was kind of expected. But I did read another book, which was a Japanese translated fiction novel as well, which is What You Are Looking For Is in the Library. And I loved this one. It was I think my brain just needed a break, something kind of nice and cozy and easy to read. And I thought it was great. It was kind of what you expect, but it's by an author. And her name is Michiko Oyama. She's Japanese, and yeah, it was a great read. I'd recommend it if you just want to give your brain a break, but also have some nice, thoughtful, I don't know, kind of serendipitous, if that's the word, kind of thought-provoking, but also wholesome vibes. So that's the kind of book that it is.
I feel like Japanese fiction is so good for that, and I think I mentioned
Yeah.
you when you were telling me that you were reading it, is that they're so good at exploring the mundane topics that
Yeah.
everyone goes through, but doing it in this like whimsical, wholesome way that still is quite in depth and makes you think. We could do a whole
Yeah.
episode on Japanese translated
I'd love to.
fiction, I'm
We
sure.
absolutely should. Yeah.
But yeah, I no other cultural translated works that I've read has really just like dug into
Yeah.
the monotony of what we do every day and done it in such a way.
Yeah, I think there's actually a philosophy as well. Like there's a word that kind of
Yeah.
describes that we don't have a direct translation to, which kind of makes sense. But also, I've mentioned her before, but Willow Talks Books on YouTube came up with a really, I think, really profound way to explain this thing that this mundanity that you or mundaneness that you see and read in these books, which is they have a lot of space. There's space in between the words somehow, and space is the best way I've thought to explain this. Because when you're reading, there's just something about the pacing and the choices of words and the way things are structured that makes you feel like you can breathe when you read these books. And it's the same feeling that I've experienced with what's the other what was the author of I can't
When the
remember his
coffee
name.
gets cold. No,
That one as well. I haven't read that one yet.
yeah,
No, the one that I just read. Where's my? Let me look it
I
up.
have
Hang
no
on.
idea.
Yeah, no. Look, they're all the same. It's basically every Japanese novel that I have read at this point. They all do it, and I think it's just a brilliant way to describe it. Anyway, so I've read that. I'll mention the other author that I couldn't think of in a moment. It'll just come to me mid sentence probably when Kris is talking about something else. But I also watched a anime, Terminator Zero, which blew my mind. If you are a Terminator fan, if you like the Terminator franchise, right, the world that's been created, this is absolutely essential viewing. I just found it on Netflix, and I was just like, oh, what's this? And it was like I think it's 8 episodes, 30 minutes each. Fantastic. It does the time travel stuff and kind of explains that quite a bit from the first movies. So it goes into that. There's actual connections between this series and the movies as well. And it was just brilliant. The actual story was very clever and smart and just yeah, really well done, and it was action packed as well. So highly recommend that if anyone is a Terminator fan. Though it's a fantastic series, those are worth your time. Cool. That's it. How about you?
Well, I watched Aliens, so the last episode
Oh,
I watched the first one. I've watched the second one now. Again, I don't know which one I like more, to be honest.
wow.
So
Okay, they're different, right?
I have heard, yeah, a lot of people describe the first two at least as being completely different genres. And I agree. Like your first one's very deep psychological horror. It relies a lot on atmosphere to drive that story, and the second one is basically an action flick. And
Yep.
if I had to pick one or the other, I'm probably going the second one. Like I liked Aliens more than the first one,
Mhm.
but I thought it was brilliant. Then I'm like, everyone says, well, everyone. I said the two people I've spoken to have been like, Alien 3, yeah. Like,
Yeah.
depends on if you want to continue on with it. But the first two I really enjoyed, and I also watched the Two Towers, Lord of the Rings. So as a fantasy fan, I've never watched the movies, so I
Wow.
watched Fellowship last year and I always get to the part where they're like making the fellowship and fall asleep. Like every time. So I finally got through it last year, and I've had a lot of flights from Perth to Sydney this year, so it's like, you know what, it's a long movie. I'm going to be sitting down for 5 hours anyway, so I watched it then, and I
Nice.
really enjoyed it. I love the Ents, like the trees, and I love them in the books as well. So that was
Mhm.
like my favorite part of the books, where the Ents just like these trees just go and fuck shit up. And I was like, yes, go trees.
Nice.
um, so I really enjoyed
Go
that.
trees.
I finished Authority, and I will say that the last 50 pages read like that compared to the rest of the book. So it really ups the ante
Yeah.
towards the end.
Yeah.
We're having
I
very
saw your
different reading
review.
experiences of it, which
Hmm.
I think is going to be interesting to talk about next time we do. Um,
Yeah.
and the other thing I've picked up is The Wickwire Watch by Jacqueline Hagan. So I'm doing this one on audio. This is I guess, steampunk fantasy is how I would describe it, but like murder mystery as well. We're dealing with spirits and specters. It's written in a very whimsical style. The prose is very short, sharp, clippy. We're following a young lad who is a pickpocket who is now caught up in this mystery, and like there's political stuff happening in the background. But it's a lot of fun. If anyone has read the Josiah Bancroft books of Babel and has really enjoyed that, this would probably be my indie comparison to that series. And then I'm in the middle of another arc, which is 900 pages, called Of Love and Loss by B.S.H. Garcia. And that's reading really fast for a 900-page book, but I'm still only 30% of the way through. And I'm like, maybe I'll get to 40% today. I don't know. It's going to take a while to get through that one. And I am playing a new game. So you don't know me that well yet, but I was a Stardew Valley stan back in the day. Really
This is
enjoyed it.
absolutely true.
And I've started playing Chef RPG, which released on the 12th of September, which is basically Stardew Valley, but you run a restaurant. Don't play it, Ryan. It'll stress you out. Um, I know
Yeah,
Stardew
I
Valley
was
was
gonna
not your
say.
jam. But yeah, I'm having so much fun with it. It's in early access, so I assume I'll run out of stuff to do at the moment. But when I'm not like reading, I love cooking and I like experimenting with food. So it's just sort of brought that love as well, which is really cool.
Yeah, wow. That sounds well, is there like a time limit where you have to do things by a certain time of day, like there is in
It's
Stardew Valley?
pretty chill. Like
Okay.
you
All
you
right.
open your restaurant when you want to, you close it when you want to. People get tired though and then don't do their jobs, which is fun.
like real life.
Yeah, like real life. Um, yeah, no, I'm having a good time with it. So I think I've put in like 7 hours this weekend since buying it.
Wow,
I
that
know.
sounds fun. That sounds like your kind of game.
Yeah,
Actually,
for
that's
sure.
good. Very cool. Very cool.
All right.
I guess we should kick into the main topic for the day, which is all about adaptations. Now, you've mentioned so in the notes, right? So we've worded it as adaptations, crossovers, I guess tie-ins. So I guess it will incorporate all of this stuff, right? Because when I was doing I actually did some research for this episode, just FYI. When I
Oh,
was
so
actually
we
writing
swap we
some
swap
notes,
roles because I didn't do
yeah.
research for this one.
That's how it's going to be, I think,
Yeah.
every episode. But yeah, there's a lot, right? And I was when I think of one and note down one, I'd be like, oh, there's this other one as well from this other thing that's similar, So like my brain was just like bouncing between all these. But yeah, there's a lot. So it's kind of incorporates all of those. So anything that's sort of related to taking something that was written or created in some way, movies, books, films, games, stage productions, and any adaptations of that in any way or form. So I've written down a couple questions for you as well. But do you want to go through this like the ones that you've watched and some of your favorites, or how would you like to tackle this massive topic?
I for me, adaptations are quite fascinating in terms of how they're marketed. And I think of the recent adaptation of The Wheel of Time. So, The Wheel of Time is a classic epic fantasy series. It spans over 14 books. Robert Jordan died while writing it, and then Brandon Sanderson came in and finished the series. Now, the books are very different. Well, I say very different. I would argue that there are similarities in the show, but then I'd not read the books before Rachel and I watched the show, so my wife Rachel had read up to book 12 and loved it. Like, grew up, was waiting at bookstores for the next release when she was a kid to read these with her dad. So I came in not really understanding a lot about Wheel of Time, and I really enjoyed the show. And she also enjoyed the show, but said, look, there are differences. But the way that it got attacked by the fandom at hating all of the differences was just fascinating to me. So I was like, I've got to read these books. I've got to see how different it is. So I read the first one. I read the first two, and I'd say the first season sort of does the first two. Um, and I was just like, I don't get why people hate it. Like, yes, there are differences, and I understand that. And if you're loyal to, I guess, the canon of the original books, but the way that the adaptation is marketed isn't for necessarily for lovers of the book. It is to draw in a new audience
Yeah.
to the franchise while also paying tribute to things in the books that people loved. And I think, I mean, we'll do a whole episode on fandoms because it's just, some of them are just insane. But I find that concept quite interesting. Why are you adapting? Is it to bring a new audience like I think this one was? Or is it to pay that tribute to, and how do you find the balance? Yeah, money. There's a whole other episode that I want to do with you about franchises that just need to die, just need to go.
There'll be many on that list.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
sorry, I went on a bit of a tangent there, but that's sort of, I guess, my
yeah,
most biggest interest in the idea and the concept of adaptations.
yeah. Yeah, 100%. Actually, you mentioned something interesting, which is like the show came out because I've not read Wheel of Time, but I know of it. I know its kind of history, and how dense these books are. And it was interesting to hear you just say the show came out and then you wanted to read the books, right? So it kind of did something else that adaptations often
Which
do,
was
which is
the
yes, they'll
point.
come out.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, to bring you to the books as well. So, and people will do that. They'll watch something and then go back and then read the thing, or and they'll have different jumping on points. And I think what makes a really good adaptation is when it doesn't really matter where you jump in. It sort of caters to all viewers or readers or whatever. So yeah, actually, that's a good example of the Wheel of Time. I think there's heaps that just in my brief research, there were heaps that obviously are books first and then become films. Like it's a ridiculous number. There are so many. But I was just curious, like how often are there like films that are then there's a book of them, or a book in a series, or the series continues or whatever. And I noticed there's a lot of that when it comes to things like comics. Like, for example, my favorite game series ever, which is Mass Effect, which for as long as this podcast continues, I'll probably be talking about Mass Effect until until whenever that is. Um, love it. It's absolutely my favorite. But there's so many like tie-ins and like there's comics and there's books and and there's all the fan content as well, right? Which I think what's really interesting sometimes that happens is the creators will sort of read that or see that and then start to incorporate some of that and it becomes canon as well. And I love that sort of community back and forth as well, right? So yeah, I was just kind of like blown away by just how many of these there
Oh
are.
yeah, for sure.
Um, yeah.
I find the game adaptations and the concept of gaming adaptations really fun as well, because there are a lot of
Yeah.
games that authors or people will see it and they go, I want to expand on the lore. I want to look at this or
Yeah.
this one aspect of it. I think, most recently I walked into a bookstore and I saw Death Stranding novels. And Rachel really
Oh wow.
loved Death Stranding, and there's like I think two or three books out within that world, and I'm like, how cool that someone's gone. The concept of that game has inspired me enough to write more, and I think there's probably a whole other conversation to have around fan fiction and its place in the world and in the process of writing. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, and then I think of, something like Alien, which started as a film franchise, but then has like one of the coolest games that has also been created off that just because of that psychological horror element. And even though the game isn't, exactly the same, it really plays on that element of what made the movie so cool. And I just
Yeah.
think that, I mean, people's brains and the creativity that comes from it is fantastic. And I know a lot of people get upset at adaptations that happen, and I'm sure we've
Yeah.
all watched a terrible adaptation of something. We could go into like the early movie of Dune, which was just horrific, but at the
I've never seen
time,
it. Yeah, I've never
it's
seen it.
it's awful, but it's also the best, and you should definitely watch it for a bit of a lull.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
but it's still paying tribute to that thing and that source material that was loved so much to go ahead and then do that, which I think is a cool concept.
Just going back on what I mentioned before about Mass Effect and just there's, tie-in novels and comics and stuff. It is interesting because there's, especially when it's a fandom of something really big, whether it's bigger than often the creators even expected it to be. Um, Sometimes some of the stuff that comes out that are, adaptations or tie-ins or crossovers in some capacity aren't great. So there's a couple of like I read a couple of the Mass Effect novels and they're okay and it continues some of the story or fills in some of the gaps or expands on someone's backstory, which is great. But I think what it does really well, more than anything else, is it scratches the itch of, if you're wanting more of that thing and like you finish the game and you've played the game 10 times back to front and like it's not enough, you want more. That's kind of what they do. And I think it's cool that these things exist and there's all these creators and people that want to be involved in something like that. So yeah, I guess the internet has kind of changed how this all works now because if you want to get involved, you just jump on in. There's a massive fandom.
You were talking earlier about when people create these fan artworks or stories and they somehow like sort of get tied into it. I scroll Twitter a lot because it's a big for the indie book scene, and there is an author that has just sort of rebranded her story. The book is called The Obsidian Path, and is it? Now I have to go and check that. I'll fact check that and put it in the notes below.
Mhm.
But she's just redone the cover. And the reason behind that is because the original cover, while it drew in an audience, didn't portray what she wanted it to. It didn't portray the essence of the story, which is a sort of, I think it's a Middle Eastern desert fantasy. Again, I'll fact check and I'll put the information down below. What she did was because she was so inspired by some of the fan artwork that had come from this book, was she then commissioned those artists to create products for the actual book and the relaunch, which I thought was super cool
Nice.
out there. Which is, yeah, it just goes to show that people who are out there doing this stuff because they're such fans have real value to the creators of the work. And I think that ties into adaptations as well as, obviously you're doing a service to that source material.
I have a couple questions for you. I'm very curious about.
Okay.
Um,
I've done zero research. Hit me.
that's okay. I've done the research for both of us. We're fine. So, because I was going through my list and sort of putting together things that I've seen or read, and where some of the gaps in mine are. Because for me, there's some big gaps actually for things like, especially a lot of sci-fi films that were books first. So even things like Starship Troopers, I've never read it. And things like 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is a Stanley Kubrick film, but I've not read the Arthur C. Clarke book. So there's those massive gaps for me. So for you, I'm curious. So two questions. So do you have? So firstly, what's your favorite book to film adaptation? Do you have a favorite?
I don't know because I'm one of those snobs that go, "Oh, the book's better."
Yeah. Well,
Like
that was
every
my second
time.
question, right?
Um,
Yeah. Is the
because
book always better?
I don't necessarily know that that's true, and that's a whole
Hmm.
conversation itself. It
Mhm.
depends on what media you relate to and you gravitate to the most.
Mm.
So we were speaking about Jurassic Park, like I said before we started this, and I think that's a fantastic adaptation of the source material. I still think that book's better. And that's one where, again, there was a gap for me. So I watched the film in
Yeah.
the early, well, probably late 90s because I was two when it came out. But watching that as something that my parents grew up with and enjoyed, I thought it was fantastic. And then reading the book, I read the book and I said, you know what? They did a really good job
Yeah.
of that. Um, okay, Misery by Stephen King
Oh
was a
wow.
fantastic adaptation of the book. It didn't have the scene that has scarred me for life until, like, to this day, because they probably couldn't put it on television or like
Wow.
movies. But it was a really, really good adaptation. And similarly, The Green Mile was also a very good book to film adaptation of a Stephen King novel, and probably the most true to form for those two.
I'm really looking forward to reading all of these first and then watching
Mm.
all of the films. Like I've got all of those on my list ready to go, but yeah, it's gonna probably take a while. I
Just
didn't realize Misery
invite me
was one.
over when you
Yeah,
watch
watch
Misery,
party.
because
Hell
I'll
yeah.
I'll be there. Kathy
Hell
Bates
yeah.
scares the shit out of me to this day
Oh,
because of that
I
movie.
do. I did. Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
Also, the book I was talking about was Obsidian Awakening. Fact check.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, the book that I was talking about right in the beginning was Kafka on the Shore by
Oh
Murakami.
yeah, Murakami, right?
Oftentimes you will hear people say, yeah, it was great, but the book was better, right? And I was racking my brain last night just thinking, is there anything I've seen where I preferred the film or TV adaptation? And there are a couple that I want to mention because I think they're quite significant ones. So, one recent one, which is Foundation. So, I've not read all of the Foundation books, I've read only the first,
Got one.
and
You have
it's
to put one
very
of them.
aged. Yeah. I mean, have you read the very first one?
No, I've got Foundation up on the sci-fi
Yeah.
shelf, but I haven't read it.
It's hard to read now because it has aged, and I think it's still important, and it was it tackled a lot of those ideas first, but there's a lot of gender inequality stuff. There's no female characters in that first book that I recall. I think there was none, maybe one, half of one. Like it's really aged. Yeah.
Just the half woman. Damn it.
I think there was like a receptionist or something,
Uh,
and that's all I
why
recall, and
wouldn't
that's it.
why wouldn't they be?
Yeah, like the hotel staff or something. Um, so yeah, it was hard to read, but anyway, the TV show is phenomenal. Like I know I've not watched the second season yet. I'm kind of been waiting till the right. I don't know if you do this, but I don't want to watch things straight away or even read stuff because I'm just like I need to be in the right headspace. I need to plan everything. I need to set aside a whole day or a whole week, and I'm going to do nothing but that. And then I just don't do it because obviously there's no perfect time to do anything.
I
So
definitely
that's one
don't
of
do
those.
that. It takes me years to finish a TV show. My housemate is like an almost rage quit on Yellow Jackets with me because I just don't sit down.
You would. Mental note.
Yeah.
How about films? You'll watch a film, right? Because it has like an
If
end
I'm
point.
forced in a plane, I'll watch a film. But if I sit down and watch a film at home, I will go and do something else. I'll just like leave
Multitask.
after
Yeah.
like 20, 30 minutes. We'll pause it. It took me so long to watch the first Lord of the Rings movie because I was like watching it in 20 minutes to get through it.
Those I can absolutely
Yeah.
agree with you. They're too long. I've not read the books, by the way. Anyway, so look, Foundation, fantastic, probably way better. It does some cool things with gender stuff as well. Like it subverts a lot of things, and it took all the things that were problematic in the books, I guess, and ran with them for the show, and it was fantastic. So yeah, I can't wait for season 2. But that's probably one that I would say the show is better. It is different, of course. It changes the source material, but that's okay. It's an adaptation. It's not meant to be the same. But another one, and I'm curious if you've ever read this or watched this, is Life of Pi by Jan Martel. It was a book first. It is magical realism, so I'm not sure I know how you feel about that a little bit, but I thought it was brilliant. The book, I absolutely adored this book. It's been one of my favorites for a long time. And the film was also fantastic, and I would say they're both equal. And it was pretty much the same. Like it didn't deviate from the book very much. But yeah, I thought some of the iconic scenes in that book, like there's a scene with a tiger, that's burned into my brain. And what I love it when you read a book and you visualize it in your head, and then when you watch the adaptation, it's exactly the same. And I'm just like, oh, there it is. And what was in my brain is like on the
That's
screen.
pretty cool. Yeah.
It was very much that. So that one I would say is equal, or maybe even like, the movie might have even been better. And then the last one I thought of was just, and I don't know what you think of this because I don't think you've seen it, but just Game of Thrones. I mean, the TV shows. I mean,
You're not a fantasy fan, though. I really like the first book. I've not read the rest, though. And similarly, I think I watched 4 episodes of the first season and was like,
Oh well.
just
I can
moved
leave
on
it. I've
with
read
my
that one.
life.
Yeah,
But
wow.
I preferred the books, but that is because I prefer that medium of storytelling. Whereas I have
Yeah.
heard a lot of people say I prefer the show because the books are very slow. They're very
Yeah, that's
slow
me.
paced.
That's me over here. Me. Yep.
Yeah. But then,
And
I mean,
I,
Lord of the Rings as well, right? A lot of people prefer those movies than the books because the books are written to be read very slowly, to immerse yourself into. I would argue the films are also very slow until you get to
yep.
like all the action stuff in the second one. But yeah, it's
I'm
just
probably
it's
gonna
interesting.
get a lot of hate by saying I don't like Lord of the Rings. I have not read the books. I don't plan to, and the films I fell asleep through them.
You know what? You're allowed. You're allowed to like and not like what you do and don't, and you're honestly not the first person. A lot of people, it's almost like a scary thing to say, right? I didn't enjoy Lord of the Rings. I
Yeah,
did,
I don't,
but
I don't,
I like
I don't
that
go
type
around
of
telling people that.
storytelling. Just
Yeah.
keep it hush hush. It's like
Yeah.
I don't like Star Wars. Just don't get it. I think it's just been
We can't
adapted.
be friends now.
It's
Bye.
just been taken from all this other stuff, and I preferred the other stuff. But yeah, like as someone who reads SFF, being like, I don't like Star Wars, like how dare you?
Yeah, yeah. You can't be.
What are you even
Hand over
talking
your nerd
about?
card. Yeah.
Um, which sort of brings me to a point that I wanted to talk about. We are in our 30s, and obviously the genres that we've enjoyed have been around for a very, very long time. So our generation has come into adaptations of something that's been around for a long time, and then, like we were sort of saying earlier, bringing in that new audience and watching maybe something new, and then going back and watching something older. How has that been? And have you gone, you know what, I prefer the original, or no, I prefer this because I've grown up with this? The example I'm thinking of specifically is something like Star Trek. We've come in and I've not watched any of it personally, but we've had this sort of
Mm.
newer franchise come in the films, and then you go, hang on, in like the 70s and the 80s, there were these TV shows, and they're really long-running TV shows that I've not grown up with, but then does it spark that curiosity to go, I'm gonna go and watch where this came from and see what happened there.
Yeah.
I'm seeing you typing.
Yeah,
I'm
I
scared.
mean, yeah, I was. Look, if we're going to talk about Star Trek, look, you've opened the floodgates here. I mean, look, so a bit of context. So Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, and Star Trek Voyager, staples of my childhood. But I love the new Star Trek as well. I mean, the films not so much, but that's also because I wasn't really a fan of the old films either. I like the shows themselves. But like I think I watched Star Trek Picard was just like a love letter to Star Trek: The Next Generation, and it was fantastic. And all the original cast, all came back, and it was great. It was really really cool, and the story was actually really good. I haven't watched some of the newer ones, so there's like I think there's Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds. I haven't seen either of those, but yeah, I think they're good. I think with something like Star Trek though, because it has such a history, like it's a lot of history. A lot of the new shows are very aware of that, and they kind of bring that on board, and they're not trying to tear everything apart or burn everything down and start again. Like they're just like, cool, this is something where we acknowledge this other show and this is ours, but there's tie-ins to, like you'll see these references and things throughout, but they don't take over either. Like it allows each show to be its own thing, but still have that connection. I guess that's actually quite hard to do because you don't see that too often. You either see, new series or adaptations of things just kind of like, they burn bridges essentially, or create their own canon and kind of ignore everything else. So yeah, it's kind of probably quite challenging as a creator to do that.
It just reminded me of Rachel's watching The Rookie at the moment, and like I feel like every show that Nathan Fillion is in, he'll bring in someone from Firefly at some point in the show, and then every like little Firefly nerd is like, "Oh my goodness, this is amazing!" And I'm like, I didn't like Firefly again, which should get me kicked out of the
Oh,
SFX
yeah, no, can't be
genre.
friends. I'm going to end this call right now. Bye.
But I just thought like. Honestly, and maybe I'll piss off the internet here, I think it's one of the most overrated sci-fi shows in the history of the
Wow.
world.
Oh, that hurts
What?
my heart.
Sorry.
Oh, stab in the heart.
And I've sat through it, and I was like, yeah, I agree with the cancellation. Or like, get out, just get out. But that's
Oh,
another one that sort of carried on. Like, I didn't mind Serenity, I think, which was the movie that came out
yeah.
afterwards. I thought that was okay. And then that's another one that's had comics and stuff done for it,
Yeah,
which I think is a
100%.
very cool way to
And they're good
continue
too.
on with a series. But that reminded me of like Buffy and Charmed and Supernatural, like, and they're
Oh,
all
all
like
the 90s shows.
long running urban fantasy
Yeah.
shows which people
Yeah.
just sort of loved, and because they were so long running, people really like dug in and missed it, and they've all had like books and the comics all done with it as well. So
I
I don't
bet
know,
there's
people
fan
just
fiction still being written today
oh,
on Charmed and Buffy.
100%, 100% there is.
Yeah.
And I'm sure some questionable shit's coming out on fan fiction.
I'd be scared to read it, that's
Yeah,
for sure.
no, not my world, but it is just sort of
Yeah.
a love letter. Were there any other questions before I keep crapping on with my own?
Yeah. I mean, you keep
Sorry.
crapping on, but no, I've got I've got plenty. So I'm curious then, is there an adaptation that you wish existed? And it can be from anything that doesn't exist, but that you wish existed in the world.
Oh, 100%. There was a book which I actually think it is fantasy, but I think you'll like it. Actually, is it? If you liked Annihilation, there is a book called Icebreaker by Stephen William Hanna, and it is atmospheric cosmic horror, is how I would describe it as a genre. And I was like, this needs a silver screen adaptation. Like, if you think Annihilation met Snow Crash, and then sort of had
Wow.
a baby, and I was like, this would be so cool on screen, and you could do it justice because it reads like something like an Alien where or Annihilation where it's really the atmosphere and it's really that unknown that builds the creep factor up, and I think that would translate really well to a screen.
Yeah.
So off the top of my head, I remember reading it and being like, why isn't Hollywood adapting this rather than going for another Marvel situation
Mhm.
or another
Yeah.
franchise that's been done to death like a Star Wars? Like, why are we creating another 3 episodes? George Lucas no longer cares, my friends. He's gone. He's out of here.
That's it.
What about you? Is there anything that you would like to see adapted?
Oh, there's a few. I'm intrigued. This is great because my TBR pile is just growing and growing each episode. But I'm actually really intrigued by that one. So remind me later because I'll forget. But yeah, there's a few. So the one that really comes to mind is one of my favorite sci-fi cyberpunk books ever. One of the formative books, which is William Gibson's Neuromancer, and it's
You're very
interesting
excited when
thinking
I
about
bought it.
cyberpunk. Yeah, I was exceptionally excited because it's absolutely one of my favorites, and I cannot wait until you read it so I can we can talk about it because I honestly don't know what you think of it. It's an acquired taste, to put it lightly. Uh, but it's interesting. Anything that's cyberpunk these days is kind of it's in an interesting place because we've reached this point technologically where a lot of this stuff is already in the world. Maybe not in the same way, but like, this stuff already exists. In consumer technology, not even just like in science and whatever. And yet cyberpunk has this aesthetic, which I absolutely love. Anything cyberpunk, and Neuromancer does it really well. It's readable. It's not too hard to approach it, but it's like I can still remember that first scene. And the line is something like, "The sky was the color of TV tuned to nothing," or something like that. And it's like like I can just see in my head like a CRT television just with that fuzzy noise on the screen, and that's just in my head. Things like that, they work so well as a visual medium. So I would hope one day we get something like this, but it has to be done well. And I think this is where it can go really wrong, because especially like Cyberpunk the game, I don't know if you've heard a little bit of information about it. When that first came out, it was kind of, there was a lot of people were hoping it was going to be amazing, and it kind of fell down in a lot of places. But what it really did well was really capture that aesthetic. And I hope that we get something like that, with that look, with that feel, for Neuromancer or any other cyberpunk as well. There was a TV show called, was it something Altered Carbon, which was based on a book.
Ah, yeah. I've watched
Yeah,
the first few episodes of the show.
that was excellent. It's one of the best cyberpunk kind of TV series that I've ever watched. I've not read the books. The books have been on my list for so long, and at the end of the day, I was just like, look, I'm never going to watch them otherwise, the show. And I was like, I need to just watch it because I want to, and I'll come back to the book. So I'll probably go back and read the books at some point because the show was great. But that was done well. It took that look, that feel, and really did something great with it. So yeah, I'd like to see that with Neuromancer.
I mean, you might get Neuromancer because didn't they fairly recently make The Peripheral, which is also a William Gibson book?
Yeah, I've not
So
read
I
the book or
mean,
watched that.
they're watching the author, so maybe how I feel like that happens with adaptations. Is like someone will pick an author, and I blame Nicole Kidman solely for this with Leanne Moriarty. Like, just I don't really, but that's just the example that comes to mind where sort of read a book of this author, really loved it, and now like everything of that author is being adapted, and I feel like
Mm.
that's sort of where I mean, and Nicole Kidman stars in all of them as well. But I
Sure.
feel like people sort
Yeah.
of go, okay, well, this was a cool concept that this person has created. What else have they
Yeah.
done? What else can we make? But I also feel like with adaptations and just TV and media in general at the moment, it's got a very short sell. Like we see a lot of shows getting picked up for season two and then cancelled because it's not
Yeah.
picked up enough traction. Um, do we talk about worst adaptations
Not
that
yet.
that we've seen? All
Uh-oh.
right. I mean, I'm sort of the opinion that every adaptation has its place somewhere. It serves
That's a
a
very nice
purpose.
way to put it.
It's a very Switzerland approach, but it's like I don't want to yuck anyone's yum. If you've enjoyed that thing and it's
I
proved
can't
that
stand that phrase.
purpose,
No. Yeah,
then
yeah.
then I'm gonna keep using it now.
Thank you.
um,
Great.
but then I think about things like this is years ago. I walked in to my housemate watching whatever adaptation of Shannara was happening, and I was like, "What is this shit that you are watching?" Because like I
That's a
just
YA thing, isn't it?
as I don't think it's adult. I've got the first three books, but I've not read
Yeah.
them. And I'm just like, the acting is awful. The sets look like they've just been pulled together from the CW. Like I don't know
Yeah.
what they call it, the
Yeah.
the parking lot where it's all set up and it's just the same shit. They've just put in everything. Um, and he was like, "No, it's really good." I'm like, "Okay, well, you do you, my dude, but not for me."
Yeah,
But
not
I've
for
I've
me.
never read the
Yeah.
book, so I can't. Yeah,
But the thing is, it's from what I understand, it's really popular, right? Like like even I know of it. I've not read the books. I know of the show because I think it reached a level of popularity, right? That's probably with the YA crowd. So it is interesting when you encounter things like that where they're not like necessarily good, but they make a lot of money and satisfy a lot of people. So like as you said, I guess everything has its place. I was actually kind of surprised just how many I haven't seen. So like I can't even speak to what's bad because like for example, Fight Club. Like I've watched the film, I've not read the book, and I really want to read the book. Chuck
Yeah.
Poloniuk.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
No idea. Know who you're
I
talking
can't
about?
pronounce his name.
No
I'm
idea.
sorry. Yeah.
No.
Anyway, so I need to read that, to even say, hey, this was a better adaptation. You could say like the some of the obvious ones, like like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I don't know if you liked the Tim Burton version of that film. A lot of people
I
like that
can't
one.
remember it. No.
Yeah, it's got a lot of people like it. But yeah, I don't know. There's been some questionable like classic ones, I guess, but I've not
That's
watched enough of them.
that's super interesting, the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory,
Mm.
because a lot of Roald Dahl's books have super dark themes,
Yeah, oh
but
for
they've been
sure.
adapted for children. But then you think of Grimm's fairy tales, super dark.
Mhm.
If you read the actual fairy
Yes,
tales, they are not books. Like they
no.
are exploring some wild thematics. They're like, let's give this to children,
Yeah, I know.
but
I
make it
read one of
happy.
those for the first time in. I've got like a collection of short stories, and I read one of those because it goes chronological, so it's one of the earlier ones. And I was just curious. I was just like, oh, I wonder what this is like. And it was like, I don't know, a few pages long. I can't even remember the name of the story. I was like, my
Yeah.
mind was blown. That was absolutely not a children's story at all. But yeah, I
I
had no idea.
And I think like Disney also have taken that approach of some of those classic sort of stories and created it like, yay, happy children can
Yeah,
watch this and enjoy it. And I just think of
that's
like
it. The parents will be happy.
the story of the Little Mermaid, horrific.
Oh,
Is not children
it's
friendly
true.
at all. Like she's a
Yeah,
siren, she like sucks the souls out of people. It's and I
yeah.
recently this year read I guess not an adaptation, what do they call it? A retelling of the Little Mermaid, or an exploration of the Little Mermaid by Cassandra Core, and they are one of my favorite horror authors that exist. And it was also horrific, beautifully written, but horrific in the storytelling. And it's just it's
Yeah.
sort of brings me to a question that I wanted to try and get to before we end the episode. I'm just watching the time that we
Yeah, I
have.
know. We can keep talking
Um,
about this one for a while.
is that do you think there are any other reasons aside from bringing in a new audience and monetary that people would make an adaptation, and what are those to you?
I think we're kind of at this point, right, where you've probably heard people say this all the time, like there's no good new ideas, like everything's been done, everything's a remix, right? Which is, I guess, true in some ways, and but it's always been true. It's not just necessarily now, but I think because we have so many like if we think back at I don't know in the '90s, let's say, so when we were kids, well, when I was a kid, and you were
I was an
kind of a
infant.
kid. Yeah. So,
And we're both kids in
um,
the 90s, it's fine. You're like
yeah,
3 years
yeah,
older
yeah.
than me. It's fine.
Well, early 2000s,
Yeah.
right? So let's go with that, right? So like primary, high school age. Um, when a movie would come out, like it would be a big deal, right? If there was a book first and then it was made into a movie, and it would be like the movie of the year, like, and you'd all go to the cinema, you'd watch that, like Jurassic Park, right? That was like it was an event, and I think we're beyond that now. So there's the adaptations left, right, and center. Like it's just they're everywhere. It's either because something is just like a franchise where it's so big now that like you can just fit lots of little stories in there, or lots of movies with you follow different characters, whatever. Like Marvel, right? That was a good example. And a lot of that is kaching as well, right? Because of course they can. But I think we're also seeing a lot of some, I guess, smaller ones as well, like even Annihilation, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, when we actually have the discussion. But like that movie, like it was made because of the love of it. Like from what I've read, the director was just like, oh, we need to adapt this, and it needs to be done right. And he had no interest in making the other ones. It was just like that first book. So I think when you encounter things that are made for pure love, then the magic happens, right? So that's what I'm seeing a bit more of, with maybe things that are a bit more obscure. Hopefully, I mean, you'd probably know better than me, but hopefully for things like a lot of the indie authors that you read, and I think I encounter one. There was one. It was on my Instagram feed. A friend sent me a book. We do like this Christmas book exchange thing the year before last. I'll find this and I'll put it in the show notes. But it's a trans author, and I just saw on Instagram that the I think Lily Wachowski, Matrix, is going to remake it with a trans and autistic lead character, and I thought that was just mind blowing, right?
And I
So
could do
that's
a
where
whole
we're at. Like
episode
this is
on
the
Lee
kind of
Wachowski.
yeah, we could absolutely, yeah. But yeah, that's really cool, right? So hopefully we'll see more of that. Things made for pure love, or because it's important, because someone has to, create this to show people, because it's an important message to get through. That kind of stuff. Hopefully,
We're trying to think wholesome reasons to adapt things, and
yeah,
this is sort of, I guess, what I'm thinking with stage productions. And I don't know. I think it may be a money grab, but at the same time, not everyone can afford to go and watch Broadway. They can't afford to go out, dress up to the nines, and go and see a stage production of something like Wicked, which is getting an adaptation later this year. So accessibility for people to still experience those stories and having that come out in a movie format is a much cheaper way for people to be able to go and experience that stage play if they wanted to. And on the other end of that, I think of things like The Greatest Showman, where they're now adapting a stage play of a movie that very much feels like a stage play when you are watching it. And I think that's sort of fascinating as well. And I know that Todrick Hall is in production of Burlesque, which is a movie I loved. I can't remember. I think it was early 2010s that came out. But I was like, this should be like live on a stage, and now that's being sort of adapted as well.
Hmm.
I mean, I think we already spoke about Shrek, the production, which is now a stage play, which is amazing to me.
Oh yeah,
Um, but
that's right.
accessibility is probably another thing that I can think of. Not so much that I think big studios are thinking this will make it more accessible for the little guy. It's still a money grab, but at least it
Yeah,
is a way that people can experience some of those things that maybe they couldn't
yeah,
previously.
100%. Speaking of stage plays, I don't know if you've ever seen the film version of Shakespeare's Twelfth Night with Helena Bonham
Uh,
Carter,
very, very long time ago.
and it does the
I'm
whole
thinking back in
gender.
high school, like
Yeah,
I watched that.
I watched it at uni. Well, it's as like extracurricular because I was just curious, and like it just does this whole like gender flipping thing, and I was just like, wow, this is. And I think it was like I want to say that was like early 2000s or something, maybe. I'm not sure on the date, but it was great, and things like that are cool because like they're taking something, like a Shakespeare play, which might have had like little bits of that in it, but of course, not overtly expressed in that way. And then they kind of flip it, or they subvert it, or they do something with it, and it's like a whole other way to make an adaptation for a whole different
Yeah,
purpose, right?
audience.
And
Yeah,
I thought
yeah.
that was great, and it was really funny as well. So if you want to be amused, it's a good one to watch.
I think it's also like, I don't know, canon to Shakespeare as well, who often would hire, or like those plays would be adapted with the different genders playing different parts. I was like, Shakespeare just didn't care. Just didn't give
Yeah, well, it
a
was
flying
it was the
F.
done thing.
Yeah, and it was so normal. And like, I think in a couple of episodes' time, we're talking about representation in media that we've read. But there was a line in Authority that we read, and I don't know when these books came out, probably in the 90s. I don't fact check me on that. I have no idea when they came out, but there was one line which was like male or female or any other gender,
Oh
and I
yeah,
was
I remember
I
that
was
one.
like, that's really cool because
Hmm.
you don't see that very often in books, in modern books, let alone in books that sort of are exploring that concept. It's like it's always been
Hmm.
a thing, um,
Hmm.
rather than just this concept that people have think is so ridiculous nowadays. But I'm sure we'll talk about that more in that episode. Just sort of throw it out there while it's at top of mind.
Hmm. Cool. Yeah, that was a good chat. But also, I have like all of these listed on my list that I put together, and I'm just like, there's so much to talk about. So yeah, you could probably spend several episodes on something like
Yeah.
this.
If you want another episode on adaptations, because we touched on nothing we originally thought we were going to talk about, let us
Which is
know. We
pretty
are,
typical.
yeah, we are at the hour though, so we should probably start
Yeah,
to wrap up. To watch the video of the podcast, head on over to Genre Blender on YouTube. The audio only versions are available on Apple Podcast and Spotify in whatever podcast app of choice that you use.
it should be called that.
Podcap if you're hip, you know. But
That's
you'll
what the cool
find
kids
all the
say.
show notes and the things we've spoken about in the description box down below. For access to the book discussions and community first updates, please consider joining the Patreon, which will also be down below. Like Ryan said earlier, it is just a free tier at at the current moment, and you can follow us over at Genre Blender Podcast on Instagram and TikTok if you want to see some of the clips that Ryan puts up. I just share them on my own. Or if you do want to go to the new website, head over to genreblenderpodcast.com for all our social media links across the web.
Cool. And to all the world hoppers out there, we wish you safe travels. We'll catch you in the next episode, and that's going to be a completely spoiler-filled discussion of Jeff Vandermeer's Southern Reach trilogy / Area X books. And yeah, if you're interested in that, there is a book discussion in the Patreon, so come join us there. But yeah, we'll be having a chat about that. So that's one I'm looking forward to. I guess you are as well. But
spicy.
yeah, until then, it could be could get quite heated. We'll see. But yeah, until then, thanks all for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time.
Ciao.